Disclaimer: this story is a work of dramatic narration created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real-life events is purely coincidental. The content does not intend to promote, glorify, or encourage infidelity, betrayal, or harmful behavior in relationships. Instead, it explores the emotional consequences of choices and the impact they have on trust, love, and friendship. Viewer discretion is advised. I still remember how simple life felt back then, before the chaos, before the doubts, before the line between trust and betrayal blurred. At 26, I was just trying to figure out adulthood, clinging to the comfort of the familiar. And part of that comfort was her, my best friend, Claire. Claire wasn't just a friend. She was the constant in my life since childhood. We had grown up together, laughed at the same silly things, comforted each other through heartbreaks, and celebrated little victories. She was the person I could call at 2 a.m. without thinking twice. She knew all my flaws and secrets, yet never once judged me. Now, things had shifted slightly since her marriage. She wasn't just Claire anymore. She was Claire and David, her husband, the man she had chosen. Still, she remained mine in a quiet way. My best friend. My anchor. The safe place I thought nothing and no one could touch. David, on the other hand, was always harder for me to read. He was older than us by almost a decade, confident in a way that sometimes felt intimidating. He carried himself like someone used to being respected, someone who rarely let his guard down. With me, he was polite, sometimes even warm, but I could never quite tell if he truly trusted me around Claire. Maybe that was fair. After all, she and I had a closeness most people never understood. But back then, I brushed those thoughts aside. We were all just living our lives, right? I had my own world, my own quiet ambitions. And they had theirs. Still, I couldn't ignore the small changes. The way David sometimes lingered in conversations longer than I expected. How his eyes would rest on me, not in a hostile way, but with a kind of searching curiosity. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking. He was my best friend's husband. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet, beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent I didn't want to acknowledge. Maybe it was the way his laughter felt a little too directed at me during dinners, or how he asked about things Claire never mentioned. Maybe it was the way I felt his presence even when he wasn't looking my way. I ignored it all, because to admit it, to even entertain the thought, felt like betraying her. And I would never do that. Or at least that's what I believed at the time. Those ordinary days were filled with laughter, with routine, with the comfort of believing that nothing could shake the foundation of our friendship. I had no idea that soon, the very person I trusted most, the one I thought would always protect me from pain, would be the one to hand me my deepest wound. And David, the quiet figure at the edges of our bond, would step into the center of my story in a way I never imagined. Looking back, I wonder if the signs had always been there. Small, quiet warnings that I chose to dismiss because the truth was too uncomfortable. But at the time, they seemed harmless. Fleeting moments, misunderstandings I convinced myself to ignore. It started with little things. The way David lingered. When Claire left the room to grab something from the kitchen, he would keep the conversation alive with me, asking about my work, my hobbies, my plans for the weekend. At first, I thought he was just being polite. After all, I was Claire's best friend. Of course, he'd want to make an effort. But there was something in his tone, something softer than casual curiosity. The kind of attention you notice because it feels heavier than it should. Then there were the glances, quick enough to deny if confronted, but long enough for me to feel the weight of them. I catch him watching me while I laughed with Claire, or when I was distracted looking through my phone. And every time, my stomach twisted with unease. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I did. I kept telling myself, you're imagining it. Don't make things complicated. Don't ruin what's good. But the moments piled up. One evening, the three of us had dinner together. Claire was her usual radiant self, telling stories and making us laugh until our stomachs hurt. At one point, she got up to refill the wine glasses. And in that short span of time, David leaned closer and whispered, "You have a beautiful laugh." I froze. For a second, I didn't even know how to respond. It was such a simple comment, something anyone could say, but the way he said it, the warmth in his voice, the quiet intensity in his eyes, left no room for doubt. When Claire returned, I forced a smile, burying the moment deep in my chest, pretending it hadn't happened. But the truth lingered between us like smoke, invisible yet impossible to ignore. After that night, I began to notice everything. The way his hand brushed against mine when we both reached for a dish. The way he listened to me more intently than he listened to anyone else. The way his compliments always carried just enough weight to feel personal. And then there was me. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more aware I became of him. His voice, his presence, the unspoken current between us. I hated myself for noticing. I hated that some part of me didn't entirely want it to stop. Because here was the cruelest part. While my loyalty to Claire kept me silent, my heart, confused and restless, was already betraying me in ways I didn't want to admit. At the time, I told myself it was just tension in my head, that if I ignored it, it would fade. But in reality, those subtle signs were not fading. They were multiplying, pulling me closer to a line I swore I would never cross. And soon, I would learn that David had no intention of letting me walk away from it untouched. There are lines in every friendship, lines we never imagine will blur, let alone disappear. For me and Claire, those lines felt unbreakable. She was my confidant, my sister in all but blood. We shared secrets, tears, laughter, even dreams. And by extension, her marriage to David was something I respected without question. At least that's what I believed. The night it shifted was ordinary, at least on the surface. Claire had invited me over after work. She was exhausted, saying she had a pile of deadlines to finish, but she still wanted me around. "Stay, keep David company," she said with a casual smile. "He'll cook us something while I finish up." I didn't think twice. Why would I? It wasn't unusual for me to spend evenings there, even if Claire was busy. David prepared dinner, moving around the kitchen with a confidence that felt oddly disarming. The conversation was light at first: movies, music, silly debates about the best pizza toppings. I laughed more than I should have, felt easy, comfortable, but then, comfort turned into something else. As I leaned over the counter to pour myself some water, he stepped closer. Close enough that I felt the warmth of his body behind me. He didn't touch me. Not yet. But his nearness was unmistakable. His voice lower when he said, "You know, you're not like anyone else I've met." The words landed heavier than they should have. My heart pounded in my chest, and suddenly the room felt smaller. Too small. I forced a laugh, brushing it off. "You shouldn't say things like that." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes steady, unflinching. "Why not? It's true." Before I could respond, Claire called from the other room, asking about dinner. The spell broke instantly, like glass shattering. We pulled back, both pretending nothing had happened. But the silence that followed carried an entirely new weight. That should have been the end of it. A boundary tested, but not crossed. Yet, as the night unfolded, I found myself replaying that moment again and again. The way his voice dipped, the intensity in his gaze. And the most dangerous thought of all crept in: what if he meant it? From then on, everything felt different. He began finding excuses to linger near me, to ask questions that went deeper than casual small talk. Sometimes it was just a shared glance across the room. Other times, it was his hand brushing against mine under the table, subtle enough that Claire never noticed. Each moment chipped away at the walls I had built around myself. And though guilt clawed at me, I didn't push him away as firmly as I could have, because buried beneath the guilt was a quiet, terrifying truth. Part of me didn't want to. The boundaries we once respected had begun to blur. And deep down, I think we both knew that sooner or later, one of us was going to cross them entirely. After that night, something between us shifted. At first, it was almost unnoticeable, so subtle that I could have dismissed it as imagination. But the human heart knows when a line has been crossed, even if only in silence. It began with the way his eyes lingered. At dinners with Claire, When conversation flowed easily and laughter filled the air, I would catch him watching me a second too long. Not in an obvious way, he was careful. His glances were fleeting, calculated, as though he wanted me to see them but never her. I told myself it was harmless, a trick of perception. After all, how could I accuse my best friend's husband of something so unspoken, so intangible? But denial only lasts so long. One evening, Claire invited a few neighbors over for wine. It was an ordinary gathering, light-hearted and cheerful. She was busy pouring drinks, chatting with the group. I sat across the living room, trying to blend into the laughter. Then I felt it, that unmistakable pull. My gaze lifted, and there he was, staring at me from across the room. His lips barely moved, but his eyes said everything. I see you. I want you. My breath caught in my throat. I looked away quickly, forcing a smile at one of the guests, but my hands trembled against the glass I held. The guilt was instantaneous, sharp like a blade. Yet underneath it, dangerously, there was a spark. A secret thrill in knowing that only I was the recipient of those hidden glances. It grew from there. When I visited, he'd find excuses to be near. Passing me a dish, his fingers would brush mine. Standing too close while handing me a towel. Always small, always deniable. Claire never noticed, or maybe she trusted me so completely that the idea never crossed her mind. That trust became its own prison, because every time I returned home, I felt torn apart by shame. Still, the glances continued. In the silence of the living room, in the brief seconds before Claire re-entered the kitchen, in the mirror's reflection when no one else was watching. He had a way of making me feel exposed without ever touching me. And the most dangerous part? I didn't look away anymore. I started holding his gaze, just for a heartbeat longer than I should. A dangerous dance, one step forward, one step back, each of us pretending it was nothing while knowing it was everything. The weight of those stolen moments pressed on me, filling my chest with a confusion I couldn't shake. I told myself that nothing had happened, that I wasn't betraying anyone. But betrayal doesn't always begin with actions. Sometimes it begins with a glance. And in those glances, something unspoken grew. An intimacy that words would never admit but silence couldn't hide. It happened on a night that should have been ordinary. Claire had asked me to stop by and keep her company while she prepared for an early morning trip out of town. She had been rushing between laundry and packing, her energy scattered, her laughter filling the house. To her, it was just another night, but for me, every second felt like holding my breath. He was there too, lingering in the living room, offering to help but never really doing much. Our eyes brushed once, twice, and each time my heart beat harder, faster. The space between us was alive with tension, though neither of us dared name it. When Claire finally excused herself to take a long shower, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The house grew quiet, too quiet. I sat frozen on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, pretending the silence didn't feel like a storm about to break. Then I felt it, the weight of his presence. He walked into the room, and I didn't need to look up to know his eyes were on me. My chest tightened as he stepped closer, each footfall heavy with unspoken meaning. "You're quiet tonight," he said softly, his voice low, almost careful. I swallowed, forcing a polite smile, but my throat was dry. Just tired. But we both knew it wasn't true. He sat down. Not across the room, not at a polite distance, but beside me. So close that I could feel the warmth of his arm brushing against mine. My body tensed, my mind screamed to stand up, to create space, to end this before it began. But I didn't move. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, and the way his gaze locked onto mine, it was the same look I had caught in fleeting glances for weeks, only now it was unrestrained, bold, undeniable. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. But I didn't. The silence between us said more than any words could. His hand reached for mine, tentative at first, then firm when I didn't pull away. The heat of his touch sent shivers through me, my pulse hammering in my ears. And before I could fully process the weight of what we were doing, his lips brushed against mine. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried every ounce of the tension we had bottled up for weeks. A kiss that wasn't supposed to happen. A kiss that shattered the line between loyalty and betrayal. The moment lasted only seconds, but it felt endless. And when we finally pulled apart, breathless and stunned, the reality crashed over me like ice water. Claire was just upstairs, my best friend, trusting me, loving me like a sister, and here I was betraying her in the most unforgivable way. I stood quickly, my heart pounding, guilt clawing at me. "This can't happen," I whispered, my voice breaking. He didn't argue. He just looked at me with an intensity that promised it wasn't over. And deep inside, though shame burned through every vein, a part of me knew he was right. Because the first betrayal is never the last. For days after that night, I carried the kiss like a wound hidden beneath my clothes, burning, aching, impossible to forget. On the surface, everything looked the same. I still laughed with Claire over morning coffee, still tagged along for our usual errands, still answered her late-night calls with loyalty in my voice. But inside I was fractured. Every word she spoke about her husband, every smile she gave him, cut deeper into the shame I tried to bury. I kept replaying that moment in my head. His whisper, his touch, his lips, and I hated myself for not pulling away. It was only a matter of time before the guilt began to show. Claire noticed first. She always did. "You've been different lately," she said one afternoon, tilting her head as she studied me. Her tone was light, casual even, but her eyes searched mine in a way that made my stomach twist. "Just stressed?" I lied, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. But she didn't press. She trusted me, and that trust made the guilt unbearable. The real confrontation, though, didn't come from Claire. Came from him. One evening, when Claire had stepped out to visit her mother, he found me in the kitchen. I was rinsing glasses, trying to steady my thoughts, when suddenly he was there. Leaning against the counter, his presence filling the room. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. I froze, water still running from the tap. "There's nothing to talk about." "Don't do that," he snapped, his eyes narrowing. "Don't pretend that night didn't happen." I turned away, gripping the edge of the sink as if it could hold me together. "It was a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. We can't." But he cut me off, stepping closer. "It didn't feel like a mistake." His words hit me like a blow. 'Cause deep down I knew he was right. It hadn't felt wrong in the moment, it had felt inevitable. And that was what terrified me most. "Stop," I whispered, my throat tight. "We can't keep doing this. Claire doesn't deserve. Claire doesn't see me," he said bitterly, his voice trembling with frustration. "Not the way you do." And just like that, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. His confession hung between us, dangerous and undeniable. I wanted to scream, to tell him to shut up, to erase everything. But instead I just stood there, paralyzed, torn between desire and loyalty. Then the sound of a door opening. Claire's voice drifted in from the hallway, cheerful and unsuspecting. "I'm home." We jumped apart, the silence between us louder than any words. My hands shook as I turned off the faucet, forcing a smile as she walked into the kitchen. She looked at us both, her eyes flicking between our faces, and for a brief, terrifying moment I thought she knew. But she only grinned, setting her bag on the counter. "What's going on? You two look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, too quickly, too nervously. He muttered something about work, and just like that, the confrontation dissolved into pretense. But I knew, with a sinking dread, that it was only the beginning. The cracks were showing, and sooner or later the truth would break through. Secrets have a way of poisoning everything. For weeks, I tried to hold mine in, to act as though nothing had changed, but guilt seeped into my voice, into my smiles, into every interaction with Claire. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. But instead of accusing me, she only asked gentle questions, as if she thought I was keeping some small personal struggle to myself. That trust, it made me crumble inside. The tension between her husband and me grew unbearable. Every time I was in the same room with him, Silence buzzed like a wasp. His glances lingered too long. His words carried hidden weight. And each time, I feared Claire would catch the spark that was already burning us alive. And then, one night, everything came undone. We were at Claire's house, the three of us sharing dinner. She had cooked her favorite pasta dish, humming softly as she moved around the kitchen. It should have been just another ordinary evening. But beneath the surface, my nerves twisted into knots. Halfway through the meal, Claire excused herself to take a phone call in the other room. As soon as she was gone, he leaned forward, his eyes locked on me. "I can't keep this up," he muttered. "I'm going crazy pretending nothing happened." My fork slipped from my hand, clattering onto the plate. My chest tightened. "Stop!" I hissed, panic rising. "Not here. Not now." But he didn't stop. His voice grew sharper, more desperate. "I need you to admit it. I need you to admit you feel it too." And then, like fate itself had conspired against us, Claire re-entered the dining room. Her gaze landed on us instantly. The look on her face, confusion first, then dawning suspicion, was something I'll never forget. What are you two talking about?" Silence. My tongue felt heavy, useless. His jaw tightened, and in that moment, I knew everything was about to unravel. "Claire?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please." She set her phone down slowly, her eyes narrowing as she shifted between us. "No. Tell me the truth." And then he spoke the words that shattered her world. "There's something between us." The sound of those words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Claire's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she stared at me. "You?" she choked, her voice breaking. "My best friend? And him?" Tears burned my eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen, I swear. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" she cried, her voice raw, sharp, and laced with betrayal. "You were supposed to be my sister, my family. And you?" She turned on him, her fury shaking the room. "You were supposed to be my husband." The fight that followed was chaos. Shouted words, tears, slammed doors. She accused, he defended. I tried to explain, but only dug us deeper. Every word made the wound wider. By the time I stumbled out of her house that night, my friendship was in ruins, her marriage fractured, and the life we once shared, trust, laughter, love, was gone forever. That was the fallout. The day everything we had built together collapsed into ashes. 59.